In today's video, I'm going to show you how to leverage connectors that are not premium, so you can use this if you don't have a premium license. And we're going to create an HTML file like this, which is inside of our OneDrive, but we could also move this to SharePoint. Or you could create a PDF file that looks like this based off of that HTML file that we created out of there. So you could essentially use non-premium connectors to accomplish all of this. And I'm going to cover how to do all of this as part of today's video. And as part of this, I'm going to show you how to actually use image files as well. All right, let's go ahead and jump right in. Now for this video, we need to set up everything on SharePoint. I'm going to reuse a lot of the same things that I've been using for a lot of the other videos. So we're going to use this SharePoint list as our tool for creating these documents. We're going to turn these items into documents as part of this video. Now, like I said in the intro to this video, there's not going to be any premium connectors used for this. And actually, there's a couple different ways to do this. And so I'm going to actually do this in a couple different videos. So this is that reminder to like and subscribe, because you might like some of the other approaches for how you could do this. And one of them is really unique. You might not have ever heard of or even thought of using that approach for handling this. But I'm going to do a couple different videos that explain a couple different ways you can do this. And for most of them, you don't need premium connectors. And some of them just give you a little bit more flexibility on what you want to do. But don't forget to like and subscribe, because then you'll get notified about the upcoming videos I'm going to do. And if you like this kind of content, it helps the channel grow. Right now, we're a little over 800 subscribers, and the goal is to get to 1,000 so that the channel is monetized and it won't cost me as much money to create this content, because right now I'm paying everything without any income coming in to kind of offset the cost, and it's getting a little expensive. So it would be really helpful to get to monetization to kind of offset some of the cost. And then I can bring you some content for things that I don't necessarily have licenses for, such as Power BI and things like that. So that's kind of the plan for the channel, is to cover a lot of that other stuff. But let's go ahead and talk about what we need for setting this up. So we've got our SharePoint list, and this is going to be, again, the items that we're going to select to create documents. Next, we need to know where our template's going to be stored so we can access it. And in this case, we've got a template processing document library that we created, and then a folder for request intake templates. So we're going to put our template in here that we're going to use. Next, we're going to need some place to store the document. And in this case, we're going to put it inside of a convert documents inside of OneDrive. OneDrive allows you to not use premium connectors to do some of these functions. So we're going to leverage that. And in this case, it's just my OneDrive account. And then I created a folder for convert documents, and that's where it's going to store the file that is created. And then we need to store the final PDF output. And in this case, we're going to put it in our document library. And again, this is the same SharePoint list I've been using for everything else. And we're going to put it inside of a folder project request. So this is where the actual PDF document is going to get saved to at the conclusion of this process. All right, with that, let's go ahead and start working on our template. Now, in our case, we're going to reuse this template. Now, I did this in a previous video. If you want to check out the creation of this document, if you want to use the premium connectors, I'll put the link in the right-hand corner of this video so you can check that out. And I walk through how you can set this entire document up, and then how you can use premium connectors. We're going to use this under the assumption that you have no idea how to do HTML. So this is the easiest way to show you how to do this without having to give you a crash course on HTML or resources out there for helping to create HTML. This is a great way to skip all of that, is just use Microsoft Word. And I'm going to show you how to set this up so that you don't have to necessarily do all that work. So let's go ahead and go to our developer option up here. And what we want to do is go to design mode. And again, if you've been following along and you've done some of these things, you've already got this document ready to go, then this will be very easy for you. But what we need to do is get rid of all of this active control content here. So we're just going to delete all these. And in this case, it's our project title. So we're going to add tokens that we can quickly identify where this stuff is. So we're just going to call this project title. And it doesn't matter what you name things or even what the format is. This is just to help us find this stuff when we're using it inside of our Power Automate. So that's the only purpose of this. You can put it any which way you want. For me, these kind of stand out when you set it in like this, but you could use whatever approach you think is easy to find when you're looking at HTML code. All right, I've gone through and changed everything. So you can see that we now have everything's been replaced with these new tokens or tags that we can kind of search and find when we're looking at this. Now, one of the things you want to pay attention to is any spaces here. So if you've got a space here and it's got underline or bold, the HTML is going to apply to that. So it's going to make the little dashes essentially appear on this when you export it. So you do want to pay attention to things like that. And I do recommend that you save these as files so that you can go back and kind of make changes to it. So right now this is a Word document. I would save this as a Word document prep for HTML. So if you've got the Word doc you want to use for other things later, you've got both versions. That way it's a little bit easier to come back in here. If you change this to HTML and then you need to make changes, it can be a little bit more complicated to do that. So it can be helpful if you save versions of this for using. Now, as you can see here, I've changed the name of the Word version of this to HTML, just like I said to do. Now what we're going to do is get ready for using this. And what we're going to do is hit File, Save As, and then we're going to go ahead and browse. I'm going to save it into this area here, but I'm going to save it as a web page filtered. So let's go ahead and do that. And for that, we don't need this. The extension for the file is obviously going to change, so I don't need that in there. And let's go ahead and save and hit yes. Now what you're going to notice is that you're going to lose your logo at the top and your title, but pretty much everything else is in here. And you can see that we've already got things kind of formatted. So that's exactly what we're looking for. It's centering it across here. And again, when we export this, it's going to keep all of that information. Now what we want to do is open up our HTML file in Notepad so that we can make a couple of changes, because again, we want the logo at the top, and then we're also going to want the page header. So we're going to make some adjustments to our HTML. All right, so when we look at this, we have our HTML. So we don't have to do any of this. Now there's a lot of extra stuff in here that you don't necessarily need. But if you did want all that formatting, essentially you would have to do a lot of this, or you'd have to rely on an HTML web tool to kind of help you with this. All right, let's go ahead and add our header. So let's scroll down here a little bit, and we're going to put it right here between the div class word section 1 and this first formatting that we've got here. So let's go ahead and pre-formatted paste in. Now this is how you would put a header in there, and I'll go ahead and zoom in, and that way you can kind of take a look at all the formatting with this. You could do a lot of different approaches for how you want to put this in here, but let me kind of just walk through some of the information. So basically what this is doing is creating a table, and it's a 3-column table. Again, there's different ways you can do this. I like how it centers things. If you've got a column on the left and a column on the right, I'm not going to put anything in the column on the right, but I want to have the logo on the top here, and I want to have the header in the middle to be centered. Now you could put this in the left, or you could put it right formatted. You could do all the different things you feel are working for your situation. So again, there are different ways to do this. But we've got our logo column, and then we've basically got a filler column over here, and this is where our title is going to be. Now, in the case of our logo, we need to use base 64, so I've just kind of put a filler here. This is where we're going to put our base 64 information. You could use a SharePoint site, but when you convert to a PDF, a lot of times you have a problem doing that, so it's better to use base 64. It seems to work a little bit more consistently. It will work for creating the HTML file, which you can then use as a Word document, but it won't necessarily work when you're trying to convert it to that PDF file. So this is the recommended approach that I've gone with, is to use base 64, and it's really easy. I'm going to show you how to do all this as well. But again, this is an optional column there. But again, because this is the exact same width as our logo column over here, it's going to enable this to be centered. If we did centered here without this column, it's going to be a little bit more to the right, because again, we've used up this space on the left. So that's kind of the reason why I've set it up the way that I have here. Now you could also go through here and clean this up. You don't need a lot of this information in here. I recommend just kind of leaving it alone, and then you can always go in and clean it up if there's anything with your setup or things that don't quite look right. Maybe you've got those underlined spaces that show up in there, so you'll want to come through and remove those so you don't have that particular problem. But this is pretty much all that you need to do here, is set this up like this. And again, we probably will make a couple of adjustments to this as we go through this. But now that we've got this, let's go ahead and save. So we'll go to File and Save. And the HTML file that we created, or the HTML file that we created, I believe that's the extension. It's not the .html. I believe it's .htm that you create when you do that filtered output. But we've now saved over the top of that. So let's go ahead and open up our file so we can see if it has the header information. All right, so it looks good. Don't worry about this. Again, we're using base 64. If we were to use a SharePoint logo that's saved in a SharePoint folder or a OneDrive folder, it would populate in here. Again, this isn't a huge issue because we haven't actually added the base 64, but we can see that everything's looking the way that it should in our Word document. All right, let's go back to SharePoint, and I'm gonna show you the next step that we need to do for handling our logo. Now we need to put our logo in a folder here so we can access it and get the base 64. So in Site Assets, I'm going to create an images folder here, and then I just drop the logo in here. And this will be what we're going to access to get the information. Again, if I open this up, it's just the logo for my channel. And then I'm going to use base 64 of this to put it on the document. All right, so the next step we need to do is start working on our Power Automate. Now, in the case of our Power Automate, I'm going to reuse this one. Now, I'll put the link up in the right-hand corner if you want to see the full build of this, as well as the entire process that was used for this. Again, if it's got this diamond here, that means it uses premium connectors. So if you don't have premium connectors, you're not going to be able to replicate this. But I'm going to show you each and every step in this, so you don't have to necessarily watch that video to understand what's going to happen here. But this is a good starting point. So I'm just going to duplicate this. So we'll just go ahead and save as, and let's go ahead and say no premium. It's a good way to identify this, and we'll get rid of our copy of and hit save. And let's go ahead and open up that flow. All right, so here is our flow. Now we need to turn it on, and then we're going to go ahead and edit this and remove all the premium connectors that are in here. So let's go ahead and edit. Now, just to make it a little bit easier, this right here is for a selected item, but because we're using the new designer, it comes up as manual. So we're going to switch this to the previous version. This will allow everything to display correctly, just make it a little bit easier for the process of this video here. Now, we're not going to have to change this. It's still going to be just for a selected item. Now, I should say that this process works for a multi-select or for a selected item. So if you watch some of my other videos where I explain how you can do this for multi-select, that process works. You would just do the exact same steps that we're going to put into here, but with the multi-select approach. But we're not going to have to change this. We're not going to have to change this. We're not going to have to change this. Now, let's just kind of explain what these are. Again, all we're doing here is when we select a SharePoint item, this is for that selected item. Then with that selected item, we need to get all the details for it. So we have to get items for the ID of the item that was selected. That's really all we're doing with this step here. Now, in the case of the impact areas, that's a multi-select, so we have to handle that a little bit different. So we essentially initialize a variable here. It's the string variable. And then we're going to process each of the selected items for the impact areas and append it to the string variable. So that's how you would set this up. And I put a comma delimitation here to separate them. But that's how you would handle multi-select fields in this part of the flow here. Now here's where we don't need some of these other steps here. This is obviously one of our premium connectors, as is this one down here. So we don't need those as part of this. But what we need to do is get our logo. So let's go ahead and add a step here. And it's going to be a SharePoint connector of get file content. And here we've got our get file content. Now we're going to find our portal. And then what we're going to do is navigate to our site assets and find that file. So inside of our images folder, and then we've got our logo right here. Now what we need to do is initialize a variable, and this will give us that base 64 or file content that we need. So we're going to find variable, and we're going to initialize it, and it's going to be a string. So we're going to go ahead and select this as string, and we'll go ahead and call this var logo data. And we're going to set the value to our get file content here. And actually, let's go ahead and rename this quick. So this is going to be our get file content logo, just so we remember what we're working with here. And then we're renaming this one to our logo data. Then what we need to do is we have a choice. I'm going to show you what I tend to think is the easier approach, but there's another way we can handle this next step. I'm going to add a compose on here. And what we're going to do with this compose is we're going to put our HTML in the inputs here. And this is going to allow us to create that HTML file. So in our notepad, all we're going to do is copy all of this and then go back and paste that into our compose. So let's go ahead and paste that in there. And now we've got our HTML content. Now I said there's a couple different ways you could do this. Another option you could do is you could put the file into our SharePoint library. We could also put the file in here, and then what we could do is replace all of those tokens or those placeholders that we put in there with the curly brackets. We could do a replace and replace all of those with our content. That I tend to think is a little bit harder, so I'm not going to cover that as part of this video. Let me know in the comments if you want me to explain how that would work, and why would you do that is probably a great question you might be asking yourself, is why would you take that approach versus the compose approach? Well, it's pretty easy to just modify this file whenever you have to make any kind of a change, or if you want to change the formatting. It's relatively easy to do that. And if you've basically done the setup inside of the Power Automate to begin with, that's all you have to do is just change this file whenever you want to make an adjustment. The way that we're currently setting this up, if we want to make an adjustment, we have to come in here and adjust the compose. So I don't know that it's necessarily harder one way or the other, because you could also just make the change inside of the document and then just copy the new HTML into here. That's always an option also. So I don't know which one you think is a little bit easier or harder. I tend to think that using the SharePoint version and then replacing everything is a little bit harder on the setup, but easier probably in the long term. Either way, you have to make the changes to the file. It's just an extra step if you have to then copy the HTML and replace this, and then potentially you're gonna have to replace all of the dynamic content we're gonna put in here as well. All right, so let's go ahead and navigate down here. Now, what do we need to do? Now, again, we put our base 64 here for our logo. This is our var logo data. So all we have to do is replace that. And then what we need to do is everywhere that we put the curly brackets, we have to replace all of that information. You could also change the title of the page if you go ahead and adjust this. This was what we had for our title before. I should also mention, you could do this entire process in the actual HTML file. I tend to like doing this as part of the actual HTML, so I just did it here. But you could have also done this as part of the actual file if you prefer doing that approach. But let's go ahead and scroll down here. And what we need to do is we need to find all of these that we put in here. So wherever we see these curly brackets, we need to replace that with our dynamic content from the get items. So we'll select this, and then we're going to get our requester. So we'll search for our dynamic content here. And we're looking for our requester display name. And again, we'll go ahead and select this again since it unselected there. And we're going to put our display name. And all we're going to do is replace everywhere that we use the curly brackets across this document. All right, I've gone through and replaced everything, and I'm pretty sure I got everything. I might have missed one or two, but that's all that you're doing is looking for every place you have to replace and actually just put the dynamic content that you put in there. And in the case of the impact areas, all we're going to do is add that variable that we created instead of the dynamic content, and then we're done. So that's essentially all we have to do there. Now, what we're going to do is create a file, and in this case, we're going to use the OneDrive version. We'll find create file, and we're going to go find our folder path here. And again, we put that inside of our convert documents folder here. So we'll select that. Now for our file name, we've already got that here in this create file. So we're just going to head and copy this and put the file name here. And then we're just going to change docx to .htm. And then for the file content, it's going to be our compose. So we'll select the outputs from our compose here. Then what we need to do is convert our file. So let's go ahead and add an action here. And again, this is going to be our OneDrive option, convert file, OneDrive for business. And here's where we have a couple different options. So we can go to a JPEG, a PDF, or GLB, or an HTML. We're already HTML, so that's not a huge issue. We're going to do PDF. And for our file here, it's going to be the ID of the file that we created. And let's go ahead and just rename this. So this would be create file HTML, and then our convert file to PDF right here. Now we don't need this anymore, so we can go ahead and delete this. And we don't need this step. And then we don't need this. So we'll delete all these extra things that we don't need. And we'll delete this one. Now for create file PDF document, we actually want to put it in our SharePoint document library. So we are still going to do this step here. But for our file content, it's going to be our create file PDF. So let's go ahead and find our convert file PDF, and it's going to be our file content here. And then we're going to use this move file PDF document. So let's go ahead and remove this because we don't need this step here anymore. And we're going to move the file PDF document. And The reason why we do this is we create this file inside of our temp processing folder, and then we remove it because we want these other options here, and we want to be able to replace it. So if it's got the exact same file name and we're basically putting it in there, we can go ahead and replace that file. Now, there might be an instance where you want to keep multiple versions of the file. What you could do is add the date, time that you create the file into the name, and then it would create that file over and over again. So that's an option also. So if you have a version thing where you want to have all of your versions that have been created, that would work also. Now, if it's a different status, the way that we've got this set up there, it wouldn't overwrite it. It would create a different version of that status. So essentially, if you have a process where you want to keep a version of every status that was in there, you could also set this up whenever you change the status that it runs the flow and does that conversion automatically. That's always an option also. But for this, what we want to do is replace. If you don't replace it, and let's say we put the file directly into this location here for project request files, if we were to try to overwrite it, it would fail. So the flow would actually fail. It doesn't fail when you use the replace option. So that's the benefit of using this kind of a setup here for this. Now, I think we're pretty much done here. So we've done pretty much all the steps that we need. Let's go ahead and save this and see if we get any errors. And we didn't get any errors, so let's go ahead and actually test this out. Now for our SharePoint library, all we have to do is select an item, and we're going to come up here to our automate flows, and we're going to find our no premium and go ahead and select this. And then we hit the continue button here and run the flow. Let's go to our OneDrive and see if the file gets created there. All right, so here is our file. Now, one caveat here, if you're the only person that's using this, this is going to work great. But if you need other people to be able to do this also, you are going to want to share this. So you come up here and share it with whoever it is, or a group, or specific people. You have the ability to share this folder with them very easily. So that would allow them to run this flow. Otherwise, they're going to get a failure because they don't have access to this folder. So you do have to consider who can get access to this folder and how this is going to work for that process. You can also come back in here and clean this up after the fact if you want to move this file, or if you want to delete this file. So maybe you want a Word-like document. So if we go ahead and open this up here, and it looks like we might have messed up our logo. This is a clear indicator of an image issue. So let's go ahead and I'm going to delete this, and then I'm also going to delete the other file. It looks like it ran correctly. So let's delete this, and we're going to try this again. And the problem is that we pulled it directly in, and actually we have to get the base 64 information. So we're going to change this a little bit. Let's go ahead and delete this out of there. And we have to put an expression in here. So what we need to do is concat, and we're going to take the data image ping base 64, and then we're going to add a comma, and we'll do base 64 body of get file content, and an underscore logo. All right, let's go ahead and hit OK, I think, but let's just confirm I didn't have any typos here. Page 64, we need to do a comma. All right, I think that looks good. Let's hit OK. And let's go ahead and test this again. And for this time, we'll just use our completion here. So we'll do this one and save and test. Now, sometimes I should add, it can be beneficial when you're doing these create files to add the delay in there. So if you run into a problem where things aren't quite working, sometimes if you put a delay after these create files and some of these steps here, sometimes the flow runs faster than you can actually do the processing inside of SharePoint or OneDrive. So sometimes adding delays of say 10 seconds will help avoid some of those issues. So if you run into some problems, try adding some delays, and then that usually resolves the problem. All right, let's go check our OneDrive again. All right, let's go ahead and open this up and see if it worked. And yeah, everything is looking good as far as I can tell here. Now, you could use this as a Word document. Again, it's an HTML file. It will open up in Microsoft Word and allow for editing it as though it was any other Word document that's out there. So again, pretty good flexibility if you want to use this as well. Otherwise, you could also add a step to delete this file and remove it so that you keep that folder nice and clean, because you will run into problems again if you try to run this again and the file's already there. So just be aware of that. All right, let's go ahead and check out our PDF version. All right, so for our PDF version, let's go ahead and open this up. And everything's looking good. Now we could adjust our header here, and we can make some changes to put this a little further up the page, or even make our image a little bit bigger if we wanted to. Again, all of that was in the HTML that we added in there, so you could adjust all of that also. Or again, like I said, you could do all of this as part of the HTML file also. But if we scroll down here, looks like I missed one here. I'm not going to show you how to fix that because I already kind of walked you through that entire process. Again, it's easy to miss. It is easy to miss these. So again, there's a little bit of trial and error that you would kind of put into this process. But yeah, everything is looking pretty good here. And essentially that's how you do this process. Very simple. And again, no premium connectors. You're always going to get a better product if you use premium connectors. That's why they're premium, I think. Microsoft knows that they're worth the money to actually get those. They're a little bit easier to work with, and they give you a little bit more flexibility, but this does work. And again, I'm going to show you a couple different approaches. I walked you through a little bit how you could use another approach as part of this video. Again, if you're interested in seeing how you could do that, let me know in the comments, and I'll take a look at building a video that actually goes through and uses the actual HTML file and does a replace for all of these token tags that we use to identify what to get replaced. And I'm going to show you a couple other approaches in future content. So again, don't forget to like and subscribe if you find this kind of content helpful. It really does help the channel grow and allow me to keep bringing this kind of content to you, because again, there is a cost associated with this, and the monetization will help offset some of that. But that's it for today. Until next time.